Good morning, everyone. Thank you, all of you, for coming to this last day of talks. It's nice to see a large crowd here. Earlier this year, I was very fortunate in that I was invited to India, to Mysore Zoo, to go and give some talks over there. And when I was there, I was talking to Aditi Sharma, who's sitting in this room today, and it became very apparent that the capture and transport of elephants, certainly in Asia, is very different to the way we do it here in Southern Africa. And it also became apparent that those differences are really dependent on the resources that are available, for example, the drugs, and the environment in which people have to work, and also whether you're dealing with captive elephants or free-ranging elephants. And we had a really nice example in the previous talk of managing a captive animal. So I thought it might just be of use to everyone just to see how we do it here in Southern Africa. It's not a new technique, it's a technique that's been around for some time, but I thought because we have quite a mixed audience that people would be really interested just to see it for comparison's sake. So this technique was actually developed in Zimbabwe way back in the 1990s, and it was initially done in shipping containers. The technique was then adopted by Sam Parks and modified, and in fact it's gone into the private sector and has been well developed there. So this is the drugs that we commonly use. I'm not going to go into the dose rates and so forth, that's not the point of the talk, but that just gives you some idea. I think the important point I want to make is that we do have the potent opioids available in this country, both atropine and thiofentanil, which are not always available in other countries, although I was very interested to see that atropine is available in Thailand. And we have quite a variety of the antidotes. Naltrexone, a full antidote, full antagonist, and diprenorphine and butorphanol as partial antagonists, which allow us to manage these animals once they're immobilized. We also have tranquilizers, which I also hear are not always available in other countries, including azaparone and haloperidol. And these are the drugs that we exclusively use to catch and manage our elephants. So in terms of the drug combinations, if you have them, they're actually quite simple. I've just put the hyaluronidase in there. Some people swear by it, others not, to say that it actually speeds up induction and speeds up drug absorption. In terms of actually immobilizing our elephants, again, this is very different to some other countries, particularly in Asia. We operate in very large areas. So for us to find the elephants, we actually need to use helicopters to go and do that. The vegetation is particularly open, so it facilitates the use of helicopters. And so what we do is once we find a suitable animal, we then use the helicopter to actually push that animal to somewhere where there's ground access, so the ground team can get into it once it's immobilized. And then obviously we do all the doughting from the helicopter, and once that animal is started, we can then use the helicopter to manage the animal and manage the induction period, because the induction can take anywhere from about 10 to 20 minutes, and you can imagine without some sort of management, that animal can travel an awful long distance and be well separated from any ground support once it becomes immobilized. And then the other thing is it makes a really great communication platform for those people that are on the ground and just keep them informed of what is going on. Now, in order for us to transport our elephants, some very specialized equipment has been developed. To the best of my knowledge, and I'm happy to be corrected on this one, these two crates here on the back of the truck are the only two that exist, and they've been designed specifically for transporting adult bull elephants. So they were specially designed so they fit within road ordinances so that we can travel on public roads. But in order to use this equipment, one, you have to develop it, and two, you need people who know how to operate it and manage it. And then again, once you have your animals immobilized, you need people that are trained in how to monitor these animals and not only ensure the safety of the animal on the ground, but ensure the safety of the staff working with them. In this particular case, we've immobilized a family group of elephants, And well, it's always interesting. People think, well, we don't pick them up and put them like that, but that's actually how they go to sleep, which is ideal because it means you can focus your resources, but you need people to make sure that they're well looked after and elephants are not lying on top of each other. In terms of an immobilized elephant, we prefer to put them in lateral recumbency because it's believed that this facilitates respiration in elephants as compared to most other species. And we give ourselves about 15 minutes to get it on its side. And as you can see in the bottom photo there, sometimes you can push them over, but many times you actually need you need the right equipment, let me put it that way. You need a 4x4 vehicle and some rope to actually pull it over onto its side. And as most of you will know, most elephants need to breathe through their trunks, so the positioning of the trunk is essential, and that's a sort of primary objective. If you have something like this where the trunk is bent through at a right angle, that elephant will suffocate within a few minutes. So positioning of the trunk is essential. The big question for many years for us in Southern Africa was, you now have your elephant effectively immobilized, and that's the easy part. It's now how do you get that animal into a crate, into that crate that I showed you earlier. And this limited the movement of adult bulls and cows for many years. We'd been translocating juveniles up until that point, but that resulted in many social problems for these animals as they grew up. So we needed a mechanism by which we could move the adults as well. And as you can imagine, an animal like that is in the region of 6,000 kilos. They're very big. So how do you manage this animal and get him into a crate? You have to often keep them immobilized for extended periods of time and monitor them during this period. And in the way we normally keep them as immobilized is either we give them repeated boluses or we have a constant rate infusion. It's the other way to do it. So the way we do it is we actually suspend them by their limbs initially. So we strap their legs together, and then we pick them up with a crane and suspend them in the air like that. And then that piece of conveyor belting there's been modified, and then we slip that in underneath the elephant while it's suspended, and then we lower the elephant back down on top of it. And then we usually use the crane just to make sure the animal is well positioned on that piece of conveyor belting so that it can breathe well and is well positioned. Once it's on that piece of conveyor belting, we then just wrap some chains around. You can see it here, and you'll see it in the next picture a little bit better, just to actually hold the animal onto that piece of conveyor belting. We then have a winch on the back of this tractor that connects onto the conveyor belting, not to the elephant, it's actually onto the conveyor belting. And we have this trailer with all these rollers on it, and those rollers then facilitate the animal moving up that trailer, and then we pull the animal up onto the trailer, and then the trailer is then hydraulically driven. Just the elephant going up is then, once it's on, we tilt the whole trailer, and now you have an elephant on the trailer, so you can now take it wherever you want to. And hopefully this video will work, and it will just give you an idea that it allows us now to take the animal from wherever it was immobilized to where your transport crates are. So it allows you to move this animal. Okay, and then once we get it to the recovery vehicles, what we have is we have what we call a recovery crate, like this. And this crate now is wider than this transport crate that you can see here. And the transport crate sitting in the background just here. The reason it's wider is obviously the elephant is now lying down, so it's a lot wider than when it stands up. But you can still see it's a pretty tight fit. So we literally pull that conveyor belting into the recovery crate, and we fold the elephant up and pull it in. And this is for these really big bulls, but they do fit. Once it's in there, we will then reverse this crate, and it fits onto the back here. So you now have a contiguous unit from the recovery crate through into your transport crate. And once that's all done, You then get everyone out, close most of the doors, put the vet in there, let him inject the elephant, and if you like him, you let him out again. So once the antidote has been injected, you've removed all the chains and everything. We give them usually naltrexone. You can give them diphenolphine, we have in the past, but we tend to prefer naltrexone. You inject the animal, get out, close all the doors, and just let the elephant recover in its own time. And this is just a brief video just showing a bull elephant recovering in the crate. You can see the conveyor belting that's left on the ground. And then you can see him transitioning from the recovery box into the transport crate. And then the doors are closed. So now you very effectively have your elephant in your transport crate. You will see that there's not a lot of space around him. It's fairly confined, so he's not able to turn around, and we're just talking exclusively about bulls now. Our family groups, we do slightly different. And he cannot turn around and move or lie down. And there's a very good reason for this, is that, this is a very tall animal. He weighs 6,000 kilos, so when you're traveling on the road, you don't want this weight moving around, else your vehicle's going to fall over. And certainly with elephants, they are quite happy just to lock their legs up, and they'll just go to sleep. And certainly adult bulls very seldom will lie down and go to sleep. So this is quite a natural thing for them to do. People often ask me, do we give them food and water on the way? And we don't. And the reason we don't is that because they're not used to eating our artificial foods that we could provide for them, and they're certainly not used to drinking out of troughs or drinking out of hoses and so forth, because these are wild animals. They're not trained animals or zoo animals, so it's quite a different situation. So in terms of tranquilization, like I said earlier, these elephants are very sensitive to azaparone, and it works exceptionally well in them. A big bull like this would probably only take about 100 milligrams, which is about 2.5 mils of Stresnol, and that will keep him very tranquilized for a good 2, maybe 3 hours. And you can see this animal here is very calm, just standing in his crate. You can see his trunk here is just lying on the floor of the crate. So we generally, the way we transport them is every 2 hours we'll stop, check them, see how they're doing, and if necessary just administer some more drugs IM. We can use haloperidol if you want to. It's obviously the same group of drugs as azaparone, it's just that it lasts longer. I tend to refrain from using it unless they become refractory to the azaparone, which sometimes happens. The reason I do that is that, once you're given it, it's going to be there for 10 hours. So you have a little control then over his level of tranquilization. And in terms of the time that they can be in these crates, we usually limit it to less than 36 hours, which sounds a long time, and it is a fairly long time, but they do fine, even though they're not eating or drinking. And like I say, they just literally sleep for most of the journey. So in terms of complications that we may get, certainly the immobilization, as we all know, the opioids do cause respiratory depression in elephants, but nothing like you might get, say, for example, in a rhino. We have measured partial pressures of oxygen, arterial oxygen in rhino, and they can go down to 25 millimeters of mercury, which is really dramatic. Elephants go nowhere near that. They might be in the region of 60 to 70. So they do seem to deal with it a lot better. But like I said earlier, you do need to place them in lateral recumbency. Etorphine does induce hypertension in elephants, and at some point, historically, we thought that caused pulmonary edema, although that is now questionable, but that resulted in us putting azaparone in, because azaparone is an alpha-1 blocker, so it helps reduce that hypertension. We are a little concerned about the dose, because we do now know, certainly in our work in rhinos, that too much azaparone actually makes them hypertensive. So I think there's need to do some work on to get the correct dose of azaparone that we include in our diet. We have had cases, and we had one very recently, where the bull is not able to stand up in the recovery crate. It's a very seldomly happens, but for some reason the animal tries to get up in a sort of unorthodox manner, if I can put it, and then they don't do it. And then we literally have to pull them back out, put them back down on the ground, and then wake them up again. Historically, we have had 2 bulls that collapsed in a crate soon after immobilization, and if they do that, they cannot stand up again in there. So we then have to again let them out. So we've done that. And with prolonged transport, you do have to be concerned about dehydration, and that's why we limit the time that they're in there. I think certainly the last elephant I did recently, when he walked out, he was pretty stiff. So I think there's a risk of muscle damage and injury, but they very soon recover from it once they start walking. And then the other issue is the broken tusks, because as you saw in that recovery video, when an elephant stands up, they throw their heads up first, and those long tusks, if they strike the roof, they can break them off. All right, so just in conclusion, this is the technique that we've developed for Southern Africa. It meets our requirements, and is being developed specifically with the resources we have available, and the terrain that we work in, and the infrastructure we have, and the drugs that we have. And I certainly appreciate that's not applicable to all areas of the world, but may give some people some ideas as to other options that's available. We have had very limited mortalities using this techniques, probably less than 1%, and most of those mortalities occur during the actual capture procedure, not the transport procedure. And once you release these animals, they recover literally within a few hours of transport, as long as they have access to water and food. They very, very quickly get over it. All right, thank you very much.